Hello, welcome to the Collegewise Virtual College Fair. Thank you for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your cameras and microphones are off, so the panelists can't see or hear you, so just sit back, relax, and concentrate on the great information you're going to get over the next 45 minutes or so. This is just one of many different sessions happening. Be sure to sign up for additional sessions at strivescan.com/collegewise. And this presentation is being recorded. It'll be available within about a week, again, at the same website, strivescan.com/collegewise. I've gotten all the housekeeping stuff out of the way, so I will step out of the way and turn it over to our presenters from Collegewise. Again, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Russ, and thanks to everybody for joining us. My name is Kevin McMullin. I'm the founder of Collegewise, a small little company I founded 21 years ago that has grown to serve tens and tens of thousands of students over the last couple decades. And during that time, we've helped students with even more college essays than have come through our program. People come to us all the time and say, can you just take a look at this? Sometimes we'll go and do speeches at high schools and they'll run an idea by us that they're thinking about. But one of the things that we've learned over the years, because we have the privilege of working with so many college counselors at Collegewise who have worked as admissions officers, is that college essays are one of those areas where students have the opportunity to make such an impact on your chances of admission, but nobody really tells you what the admissions officers are looking for. Nobody really gives you good guidance about, is this the same as writing a high school English essay, or is this different? Are my goals different? What are the best approaches that I should be using here? And what we've done over the years is actually come up with 4 tips that if you just do these 4 things that I'm going to share with you in the first 15 minutes, I think that you will write vastly superior essays to many of the students that are applying to the same colleges that you are. And these are easy tips that anyone can follow. One of the best things about college essays is that they don't discriminate on the basis of grades and test scores, that you don't have to necessarily be someone who considers yourself a great writer. You don't have to be an AP English to find and share a good story. So I'm going to share these 4 tips with you, and I'll give you some examples and hopefully get you guys thinking about some good stories that you might share. And then I'm going to turn it over to my 2 colleagues, 2 of our counselors who are joining me today, Nicole, Pilar, and Christopher Logan. They are also going to be answering questions in the chat while I'm going here. And so, all right, I'm going to give you my 4 tips. And if you're using any sort of note-taking devices or paraphernalia, this is the time to have them ready. These are the 4 foundational cornerstone tips of writing great college essays, and they work for any essays you might be writing. If you're writing an open personal statement when they've asked you, a college asked you to write an essay on a topic of your choice, or if you're applying to schools that are on the Common Application, and the Common Application gives you a number of different topics you can write about, whether it's a long essay of 500 to 600 words or a shorter essay of 200 or 300 words, maybe even where a college is asking you, why do you want to attend our particular school? No matter what the topic, no matter what the school, these 4 tips will help you write great essays. And the first is actually the most important tip that I have to share with you. My first tip is, don't try to impress the admissions officers. Just be honest. And I will acknowledge right away how counterintuitive that advice sounds, because everything you're trying to do when you're applying to college is to impress the admissions officers and get into those schools. The college admissions process, unfortunately, feels like a very judgmental process, because it is a very judgmental process to put down your grades and your accomplishments and to put all the stuff about yourself in an application and then to present it to an admissions committee where they do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That's very judgmental. So it is only natural that when students sit down to write their college essays, they read the prompt, and almost every student will inevitably ask themselves, what is going to sound good in my answer? How can I impress the admissions officers? What do they want to hear? I absolutely understand why people would ask themselves those questions and why you naturally take that approach. But there are really 2 problems with that approach. The first is, when you ask yourself what's going to sound good, what would they like to hear, you inevitably write the very same type of essay that so many other students are writing. And a lot of the ways that they do that are very common and kind of widely used by applicants. Things that people that will pick an activity or accomplishment that they're proud of. and they'll describe it in the essay and then describe how this helped them display or learn valuable traits that they think might be impressive to an admissions office. Or they might take a life circumstance or a challenge that they've successfully overcome, and they'll share that with the admissions officer and say, this is an example of my fortitude or my will, or how I don't back down from challenges. And I want to be clear with you that there's nothing wrong with those topics. And in fact, there are ways that you can write about those topics very successfully. And I'll share some ways in just a moment. But when you write those types of essays and say very similar things to what so many other students are saying and writing, it doesn't help you stand out, which is the goal of what you're trying to do. And that leads me to the other reason why this is a bad approach. So reason number one, that trying to impress is a bad approach, is that you end up saying the same things that so many other students are putting in their college essays. Reason number two is that impressing the admissions office is actually not what the college essay is for. Your application and your college essay can be considered two different entities, and they're trying to do two very different things. The application itself is where you are presenting your qualifications and your accomplishments to an admissions reader. That is where you're trying to impress them. So that's where they're going to see your transcript. They'll see the grades that you've got in those classes. They'll see the activities that you've participated in, and you've described how much time you spent doing these things and what kind of success you've had within those. You'll list your honors and awards. You might even have letters of recommendation from teachers if your application calls for that, depending on the school. That's where an admissions officer decides, does this student deserve admission? Have they worked hard enough? Could they be successful here? So what's left with your college essays is for the admissions officer to try to get to know you as a person, because you're not just a collection of grades and test scores. You're not just the accomplishments as they're summed up on these electronic documents that you're submitting to colleges. You're a real person with real thoughts, and they're trying to get to know who you are. The college essay, or essays, depending on where you're applying, is the vehicle they use to do that. One of our most experienced counselors here, who read applications at University of Chicago and Caltech and at UCLA, described it this way. He said, when I would read the student's application, not the essay, but the application, I would be asking myself, do they deserve to be admitted? But when I would read the essays, I would be asking myself, do I like this kid? If I were back in college, would I want to be this student's roommate? And the best way to be likable in a college essay and to help them get to know you, and cliches, which are overused phrases or ideas, are not what you want to use in college essays. And I'll acknowledge this is a cliche, but the best way to get people to like you is to just be yourself. So my first tip means look at those prompts, look at what the college is asking you, and ask yourself, what is my honest answer to this question? If I just had to tell the truth, if I was going to get bonus points for just being as honest as possible, what is my honest answer? And then ask yourself, is my honest answer something that I would really like to share with the admissions committee? Is it appropriate to share here? Because when I say that you shouldn't try to impress the admissions committee, I'm not suggesting that what you write doesn't matter. I would not suggest that you write a college essay all about how your favorite thing to do is to blow off your homework and watch TikTok videos all night. That's probably not the kind of idea you want to share with an admissions office, even if that is your honest answer. So use common sense, but remember that the more you try to impress, the more likely you are to write the same essays that other students are writing, and the less likely you are to stand out. The best way to stand out is to be yourself, answer those questions honestly, and use the essays not as a vehicle to impress them, but to engage them, to help them get to know you as the person that exists outside of your application. So that's tip number one. Don't try to impress, just be honest. Tip number two is you must own your stories. This is a college-wise phrase that we use with our students and we've been using this for over 2 decades now. Own your stories for us means that you want to write essays that only you could write. Now, it's the rare student who can do that because they've done something so extraordinary that no other teenager applying to college could possibly have done this. If you swam in the Olympics and you set a world record, well, you own that story. You are the fastest swimmer in that event in the world. You can do that. Most people, not just students, most adults, I don't have anything that I've experienced that nobody else on the planet has experienced. So that's the much harder way to own a story. The easier way to own a story, and it doesn't matter whether you're an A student, a C student, or anywhere in between, the easier and just as effective way to own it is to inject as much detail as possible into your story. Because no matter what you're writing about, that experience is your experience. There might be other students who worked a part-time job at a fast food restaurant like you do, but their experience is not the same as your experience. There are other students who played a sport or who taught themselves a musical instrument by watching videos, or who like to write poetry, or who have studied martial arts, or who immigrated to this country, or who go home immediately after school to take care of their younger siblings. Any one of those stories is viable, but without details, someone else could tell the same story. As soon as you inject enough detail into that story, you then take ownership of that story and you write one that nobody else could tell. So there are really two questions you can ask yourself to test whether or not you own a story. And the first is to ask yourself, as you're considering your topics and even as you're writing your essay, could somebody else tell this story? And if your answer is yes, somebody else could tell this, then add more detail into the story. Don't just say that your mother encouraged you before your first day of school in the new country. Can you remember what she actually said? Do you remember where you were? Were you in the car? Did she say it to you right before you walked into the school? Did it resonate with you? Did it not resonate at all? Those are all details. And you have to decide what's worth sharing and what isn't worth sharing. But one good way to do that, and we advise our students to do this, is put all the details in as you're writing draft number one. Don't worry if your essay is, twice the length that it should be. It's much easier to go back and pull unnecessary details out, because the most important details, the ones that really make your story sing, those will reveal themselves as you work through your drafts. But get the details in there first. So that's the first question you should ask yourself. Could somebody else tell this story? And if your answer is yes, put more detail into your story. Now, the second question you should ask, or rather the second really thing you should consider as you're trying to take ownership of these stories, and this is kind of a magical technique that very few students have the confidence to use. Our Collegewise students do this all the time, and I'm going to share it with you right now. If you are unable to find enough detail to take ownership of a story, choose a different story. That's a sign that this is not the right story for your college essay. Now, it does not mean that the story itself isn't valuable. There might be something that meant a lot to you, an activity that meant a lot, an experience that really was challenging, something that's very important to you. And you sit down and try to write about it. And you say, I either don't remember it that well, or I just don't have that much to say about it. I'm struggling to find enough detail to take ownership of this. It does not invalidate the experience, but that is your story's way of telling you this is probably not the right answer for this particular prompt. The best college essays tend to write themselves because the students can just describe them and all the detail just comes pouring out when they describe it. And when we're working with our own students, we can usually just say that right there, what you just said, put that down on the piece of paper. That's your story. So you want to look for something that allows you to tell the story almost effortlessly, and where the details are rich in your mind, they're easy for you to share. When you do that, you end up writing a story that may be about a comparatively common topic, but it becomes very uncommon when you add the detail in to make that story yours. And that's why we call it taking ownership of your story. One good example of this, by the way, we had a student not too long ago who was a star baseball player and decided that, this is about 5 years ago, and he decided that he did not want to write his college essay about baseball because he just didn't have anything to say about it that nobody else would really be able to say. He thought, like, what I'm going to say is that I really like baseball and it's hard work, and I can tell you what it's like to be a pitcher, but it's not really anything different than any other pitcher or baseball player might write in their essay if they wrote about baseball. So he wrote an entirely different essay about the drama club, which was something that was not one of his primary involvements. But when he talked about it, it was actually something that he really enjoyed. And he loved that the drama club went to junior high schools and they actually did presentations as part of like a healthcare unit where they talked about drug usage and keeping yourself healthy. And he said, listen, I've been in a lot of stressful situations, pitching on the mound, when our team is down and I got bases loaded and I gotta get this side out and try to save my team. None of those things were ever as stressful as standing up in front of a room of 7th graders trying to entertain them with the drama club. That's a great story. And that's an example of one that he could own. Other people were involved in drama clubs across the country. Other people have their own stories to tell. They can tell those stories, but that one is one that he owns, where he can talk about the contrast with baseball and why he liked it so much, and why he enjoyed being around those particular kids and what he loved about doing those presentations at the junior high. That's what taking ownership of the story really looks and sounds like. Okay, so you got don't try to impress the admissions officers, just be honest. And you've got own your stories, which you do by injecting enough detail so you're the only one who could share it. Tip number 3 is don't repeat information from the rest of your application. And here is where you see the tips start to overlap a little bit, because remember I said at the beginning that one of the reasons why so many people make the mistake of trying to impress and write the same essay that so many other people do is they write about an accomplishment they're proud of. Oftentimes, those accomplishments are already detailed on the application. You've already talked about the award that you won, or you've already talked about that particular activity that you had so much success in, or the accomplishment that you're proud of. Sometimes, even depending on the application, you may have even mentioned the challenge that you want to write about. And by the way, I'm not saying that all those things are wrong to write about, but I am saying that if it's just sharing the same information they already know from the application, that's a problem. What needs to happen when the college admissions officers read your essays, they need to learn new information about you that they did not know just from reading the application. If they read exactly the same, if they don't learn any new information, you've lost an opportunity. Every part of your application is an opportunity to share new information about yourself. So the 2 ways to share a story that is not repeated from your application is to, number 1, pick a story that has not been mentioned anywhere on your application before. That's one way that you could do that they just do not know about. So maybe they don't know about that conversation you had with your parents the night before you went to school for the first time in this country. Or they may not know the time that you got fired from your part-time job and how that happened and what you learned from it and why you went out and got another part-time job. Whatever the experience is, they may not know that sort of detail, but you can pick something that has not been mentioned anywhere on your application, or you can share new information about something that already has been listed on your application. So the baseball player I just shared with you, that's an example of somebody who said, I'm going to write a story about something you do already know about because you read my list of activities. You have seen that I was in the drama club. You know how many hours a week I did that. And I even gave you 2 sentences of description of what that activity was about. You know that part about me. But I'm going to share new information about that, about what we did at those junior high schools, why this is so much different from baseball, why this meant so much to me, what these students in that group meant to me. And it became something that was brand new information. So if you are simply rehashing information they've read, you're missing out on an opportunity. So look at the topics that you, and the subjects you're choosing to write about and ask yourself, do they know about this already from my application? If they don't, you're good to go. If they do know it from your application, then ask yourself, what new information am I going to reveal, often which you do through detail, which help you take ownership, which help you stand out, all the things you're trying to do, right? So make sure you're not just repeating things. Nobody likes hearing a story they've already heard before. You probably had that happen with your friends. Somebody tells you a story you've already heard. You want to stop them and say, I already know this story. That's what happens in a college essay. If you write about something they know about your college application, it's an easy mistake to avoid. All right. Don't try to impress, just be honest. Own your stories. Don't repeat information from the rest of your application. And tip number 4, everything we've shared before has been about choosing appropriate topics. Tip number 4 involves the writing. Your essays should sound like you. Your essay should sound as if you're actually describing the story to someone. It should have your voice in there. It should not be a formal piece of academic writing that sounds like an essay you write in your high school English class. What your English teachers are teaching you is exactly the right thing. Those are academic papers, and when you go to college and you have to write papers in college, they're going to expect you to write in exactly that same way. But this college essay, you're not writing about a book that you read necessarily, or at least if you are writing, if you do choose to write a book, it's not for the purpose of getting an A from your English teacher. It's for the purpose of helping this admissions committee get to know more about you. And that means your essay has to sound like you. Now, we all use different voices, or we talk differently to different people in our lives. You could read a book you really loved or see a movie you really loved, And you would describe that very differently to your high school principal than you would to your best friend, right? You speak differently to those two people. So the tone you want to go for in your college essay is, imagine you were describing this story to your favorite teacher. And the reason why I say your favorite teacher is that presumably your favorite teacher is an adult that you respect, but that you also like and feel comfortable with, that you could still sound like yourself. So imagining describing the story to your favorite teacher prevents you from being too formal, and it also prevents you from being too informal. A really good litmus test for your college essays, both in terms of your choice of topic and your tone of writing, is if you show it to someone who really knows you well, a family member, a really close friend, a relative, show it to one of those people. If they read it and say, oh, this is totally you, it just sounds like you, well, that means you've probably done this right, because you're trying. And look, the admissions officer is never going to know you like your close best friend does or your closest relative does, but you want to get them a little bit closer to knowing you that well. And the way that you do that is by writing essays that work to share something about yourself that's honest without trying too hard to impress, by putting enough details in there so that only you could tell that story, by ensuring that you don't repeat something that they've already learned about from your application, and by writing it in a way that sounds like you, not like you're talking to your best friend, not like you're talking to a professor, but more like you're describing it to your favorite teacher. So if you do those 4 things, I promise you that you will write stronger college essays. And I promise you that no matter how comfortable you are with writing, you will be able to use those 4 tips effectively. So I am now going to turn this over to our 2 counselors, Christopher and Nicole, who are going to tell you even more details about not only how to use these tips, but more importantly, how to use them in the supplemental essay questions that are so common for so many colleges this year, and it'll really help you put a stronger application together. So thanks for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful, and I'll turn it over to Christopher and Nicole now.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, guys. All right, so we are going to talk about the supplemental essays. These are really important. So Christopher and I put together a little bit of a PowerPoint. So again, you can all just sit back, relax, and kind of enjoy the ride.
So hi, I'm Christopher. I am one of the counselors here at Collegewise. I'm based in Pasadena, California, and I went to Yale and briefly worked in the Yale admissions office.
And I'm Nicole. I work in our Orange County office. I graduated from Pittsburgh College and completed 2 consecutive Fulbright Awards with the State Department, working with students doing applying to English speaking programs in both Europe and the United States. And the essays are something that I think Christopher and I both really, really love to talk about. We literally geek out on all the time, I think, when we're on calls together. So let's talk a little bit about the plan for today, right? Christopher, do you mind doing a slide? Yeah. All right. So we want to just kind of do it really quick, really easy. Hopefully that you all can kind of get the most out of the 45 minutes we have together. First, we want to do an overview of what the short answers are. What is their purpose? Why are colleges, why is Stanford asking you eight essay questions? What's the point of that, right? Yes, 8 if you haven't looked yet. We are also going to talk about 6 different archetypes, or really, kind of the main topics that you see pretty frequently across different schools. And so hopefully students, we can kind of talk about some strategies that we recommend for reduce, reuse, recycle with a lot of those essays. So with that being said, Christopher, you want to tackle what the short answers are?
Yeah, so one thing we'll talk about today is what supplements are and sort of why they exist. As Nicole mentioned, individual schools will ask you their own questions, and they'll ask you anywhere from 1 if it's Tulane or NYU to 8 if it's Stanford. And the purpose of those is to get a bit of a better idea of who you are. Kevin mentioned earlier that lots of students do focus on the sort of open-ended personal statement when they're thinking about their college essays. And that's fair, and that's a very important essay. But that one is sort of more of a you standing on top of a hill screaming, "Hello world, this is who I am." Whereas the supplemental essays are much more direct, they're much more pointed, and they're also school specific, unlike the Common App personal statement. So this is each college's chance to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about the things we specifically care about, the things we are interested in? And it's a way for you to tell them, this is why I'm the type of student who's a good fit for this school. And sometimes that is directly what they're asking you about, but we'll get to that when we actually get to the archetypes of the different supplements. So Kevin just went over these rules with you, but I have them written here in case you didn't have a note-taking implement. And all of them still apply when you get to your supplements. Don't try to impress them, just be honest. Don't try to impress them with how much research you did on the school and by name dropping every professor you could research. Be honest about the reasons you want to go to a school or the reasons you want to study something. Own your story. These are meant to be short, and some of them are long, but some of them are only 100 words. If it's an MIT supplement, they also have a lot of them. But you still need to make sure that you put the details in there. Make sure that you're really explaining not why computer science is interesting, but why you happen to be interested in computer science. Talk about your specific interests, your specific goals. Don't write those grand statements about how you would love to help people and use your skills to make a contribution to the world. Be specific. What exactly do you want to contribute to the world? What are the skills that you want to apply? What are the ways that you want to put forth your best foot? Same thing. Don't repeat information from the rest of your application. They're going to be seeing everything you've already put on there. If you're doing the activity 150, I like to call it, then make sure that you're not just repeating information that you put somewhere else. Approach it from a different direction. Same thing for information that might be similar to what you put in your comment at personal statement. Don't just repeat the same thing. If you wrote your personal statement about the subject you're most interested in, and then they ask you for something that's similar to what are you interested in, make sure that if you're going to touch the same topic, you do it from a different direction. And like Kevin said, you should sound like you. So remember, you should make a plan before you actually start your supplements. One of my big pieces of advice is for every school you're applying to, sort of lay out what all of their supplements are. Look at them all together at once and plan out what you want to say to each one of them. That way you don't find yourself writing 4 of the Stanford supplements only to find out that, I need to rewrite 2 of those because I have to put those 2 stories into this supplement, and now I need a new idea for up there. You should always make a plan before you just dive in, and that does apply to your supplements. Also, generally speaking, you should plan out the supplements that you have for lots of different schools, because you may find that there's a lot of overlap and you can recycle. And it's good to know what you can be recycling from jump, because you may find that it's easier to write 2 or 3 of them at the same time for different schools because they're so similar. But let's get into the specific archetypes. And I think Nicole's going to take over.
All right, so to start off, this is hands down one of the most common, and it's pretty straightforward, right? You know, if you're applying to a college, they want to know why you're applying to that specific school. So the archetype we're going to start off with is the why us supplement. You'll notice that a number of schools ask this question. They tend to ask it sometimes very straightforward, but also they will ask it sometimes in some really roundabout ways. We have examples from Tulane and McAllister, both which, if you look at the heart of what they're asking, is really a why us response. And so when I'm working with students, the big thing I like to have them think about is, you know, first, this kind of idea of reflecting within, but also reflecting outward, right? What is it that you as a student are looking forward to in the collegiate experience at a basic level, right? Sometimes I like to ask students, what do you like about your current high school experience or the place where you currently live? What do you want to change? What do you want to keep the same? Those can be some really great places to start as you start thinking about why you want to go to college in the first place. But then you need to take this a step further and really be thinking about, based off of those wants, those needs, those, you know, aspects of the next step of your life that you're looking forward to, how does that college specifically match those? I want to be very clear here about this response, because I see it time and time again in students where they basically just go onto the school's Wikipedia page or their About Us page on their website and then just regurgitate information. Berkeley knows that they have Nobel parking spaces for life for their Nobel Prize winners. They don't understand why that's important for your educational journey, right? So I think it's really important, students, that depending on the length of the response, you're very targeted about the reasons why you're choosing to apply there, because there's nothing worse for a reader to read than just a list of just random unsubstantiated facts about the school and why you think it's important. So with my students, really kind of be reflecting inwards. Again, what do you want out of a college experience? What is important to you? Why is that important to you? Too often I see students that just, again, will list off things without really telling me why that is reflective in their goals or something that's important to them, and maybe something that they haven't experienced before. And sometimes this can be starting out with something really general. I had a student that I worked with a couple of years ago that had a beautiful start to one of the Yale supplements about, you know, what he was looking forward to most about, you know, Yale and why he wanted to go there. And he talked talked about wanting to go to a place where he wouldn't be made fun of for starting on projects the day they were assigned. And then he continued to write about how, Yale was a school that really had project-based learning in the specific program of study that he was applying for. That was a great kind of general entrance where he got very specific about how that school provided and met that need, and also how it related to his future goals and his future wants. So in summation, the why us really means the student doing kind of reflection on their own wants and experiences, but also really doing that research on the on the back end there about how that school specifically meets that. And this can be done in a variety of ways. This can be going onto the school website. If the school is virtually visiting your high school, definitely show up for that visit. Maybe it's asking questions in an interview option that you have, or going to one of those online webinars that they're offering. Colleges these days are making themselves more available than ever with the use of the internet. So I urge students take advantage of those resources. Your essays will thank you. And quite frankly, the readers at those schools will be thrilled. Next slide, please, Christopher. All right, this is another really common one. You'll see it a lot, right? Besides the why do you want to come here, what do you want to study when you are here, right? So, Yale, for example, has some really interesting takes on this. Cornell also is pretty straightforward. The what do you want to study, similar approach to the why us. This is, again, really reflecting inward, but also reflecting outward. What is it? Why is it that you're drawn to that particular area of study, right? What are your future goals that you have? Why do you want to study business? I see so many students, I'm going to pick on business here for a second, that talk about how they want to study business, but then when I ask them why, they're just like, because I think that's what I should do in order to get a job. One of the cool things about studying business at the collegiate level is that so many colleges have so many different tracks within their business program. Are you drawn to marketing? Are you really fascinated by finance? Are you, interested in systems operations? Do you even know what that is, right? I think this really kind of is, the onus is on the student to really do that reflection. You'll notice we talk a lot about reflection with our students because we think that making, strong choices and doing that back end work before writing the essays really produces the best work that a student is possible of creating. And so it's thinking about what is you want to study, but then also the why. And if that why isn't really there, if it's not really flushed out, maybe this is talking about experiences you've had with that particular field of study that you have engaged in high school. Maybe it's talking about an idea that you want to pursue in the future, or a career goal that you have and how this school and this major is going to help you get there. But you need to have a reason as to why, beyond just it sounds like the thing I need to do. Because if you don't have a lot of that meatier, why, or how you plan on getting there, or goals, or something behind that, it's not going to be a really great response, and you're going to have trouble, quite frankly, writing it. The next step after that reflection is really also, again, investigating that major at that school. Are you drawn to Cornell's engineering program because it's one of the few in the country that literally allows you to design your own engineering program? They have a very flexible curricula there that will allow a student to kind of create their own adventure within an engineering program. That's very unheard of and not something that's common. And you can see that they're literally asking about, why are you drawn to our specific program? So spend some time, students, when you're researching your schools, when you're, looking over what essays you have to write for them, thinking about the why us, but also the why this major. Why do you want to, the why this major is really, why do you want to study X at our school? And be mindful of the word count there, because sometimes you have a lot of space, like, University of Wisconsin gives you up to 650 words. Yale, I think it's 100 or 150. So you want to be really thinking about how many ideas you want to focus on within those responses.
And the next archetype we're going to talk about is the contribution to community archetype. And there are two versions of it here. They're similar, but a little bit different. One is the MIT prompt, which asks you to define community the way that you best see fit, and then to talk about what your contribution to that community is. And the University of California, this is PIQ option 7 of 8. You don't have to write this one. You get to pick 4 of those 8. But if you want, you can write about what you've done to make your school or community a better place. And in the same way, they've left community here undefined. You get to pick what community means to you. And that is truly one of the most important parts of starting this type of essay. Nicole's mentioned a few times that we are going to talk about introspection and looking in a little bit in every one of these archetypes. And that's because it's true. And it's very important because these are meant to be personal statements. Even the supplements are small personal statements. You have to think about what your personal response is. So for the contribute to community one, you really need to think about, what does community mean to you, and what are the communities which you feel the greatest connection to? Your community may be your school, it may be your church, it may be your youth group within your church, it may be an organization you're a part of at your school, it may be your neighborhood, it may even be a sort of an online community that isn't really geographically close to you. Some students, especially given how popular Minecraft is, a lot of students think of their community as sort of like their Minecraft server. Some students' contribution to their Minecraft servers that they've created Discord servers that they host for people to be able to connect and to be better friends with one another so that they feel a little bit more connected and that they aren't just online playing with people that they'll never be friends with. Maybe your community is your sports team, and your contribution to your sports team isn't that you break records, and it's not that every time you win, it's because of you. Maybe your contribution to the sports team is that you really go out of your way to make sure that new members of the team feel welcome. Maybe you are a varsity runner and you have one of the top times on the team, but you make sure that the slower runners of the team or the newer members of the team don't feel left out just because they can't keep up. You don't need to have built a new schoolyard. You don't need to have done Habitat for Humanity to contribute to the greater community of mankind in order to have a good response to this. What you really need to do is stop and think about what feels like your real community here, and what do you think will be most important for you to say you connected with or that you contributed with. They know that you're 17 or 18 years old when you're doing these applications. They know that you haven't won a Nobel. They know that you haven't redesigned every piece of the facility at your school or at whatever organization you work in. So just sit down and be honest and be personal about what you have managed to give back in whatever way that happens to be. Now, the next archetype is one that can be a little bit controversial for students. It's the diversity essay. And one of the first things I want to say in addressing the diversity essay is that you should not feel limited to a perfunctory definition of diversity. It's true that there is diversity of race, there is diversity of ethnicity, there's diversity of sexual orientation, diversity of background, diversity of socioeconomic status. Those are some of the options for diversity, but they are not the sum total of all of diversity. There is also diversity of thought. There is diversity of experience. There is diversity of interest. There's diversity of passion. There's diversity of athletic ability. There's diversity of artistic interest. There are so many different forms of diversity that every single person has something they can say for any diversity essay. It's also very important that you keep in mind what the actual wording of the prompt is. Some of them are very openly diversity essays. Some of them are a little bit more amorphously diversity essays. If you look at the University of Michigan, for example, this sort of touch back on that community idea from the last slide. Everyone belongs to different communities and or groups defined by geography, religion, ethnicity, income, cuisine, interest. They're all of these. Maybe diversity for you is, I happen to be very into steampunk. Great, you stand out, you were unique. Write about that. Whatever diversity happens to be for you, latch onto that. No one is out of the running for a diversity essay. Everyone has something interesting about themselves. An inability to produce an answer to a question like this does sort of speak to an inability to align yourself with the ethos of the university to which you're applying. You should think about what it is that makes you different. Kevin spoke at the top about how many students could write about the same activity or write on the same topic, but every student has specific details that make his, her, or their story different from another student's. That's because everyone has a diversity of lived experiences. Even if you are what you might think is the majority of the applicant pool, something about you is different from every other person who falls into whatever general demographics you're thinking of. So talk about what's different about those. If you're that baseball student Kevin spoke about, your diversity is that you're also a huge theater kid and that you're on the baseball team. Maybe you want to come play varsity sports at that school, but you also kind of want to pull a high school musical and you want to bring all of the varsity athletes to every one of the musicals that'll be on campus. Great, that's your diversity. It should be about whatever makes you, you. Because in some ways, you are different from every other person who you think is like you. You are not actually cut from a cookie cutter. So you'll be a little bit different and focus on that.
All right, so the activity essay. This is another one that's really common, and that's because schools want to understand, besides eating, sleeping, doing homework, occasionally talking to your parents, hopefully, what are you spending your time doing? Because those choices that students make, and the ways in which they make them and how deep they go, or, what is it that they're choosing to spend their time on is a pretty good indicator as to who they're going to be when they come to my campus. So These generally are pretty straightforward. The length can differ, but I think students, again, this is where one of Kevin's rules about don't repeat information from the rest of your application comes into play. So for example, if you talked about ballet pretty extensively in your Common App personal statement, it's okay to talk about ballet in the describe an activity that's been meaningful to you, but you need to do so in a way where ballet is a standalone essay. So perhaps talking about the creativity aspects of a ballet performance that you choreographed and put on as your Common App personal statement, but you want to talk about the leadership skills or overcoming a broken toe in your describe an activity that's meaningful to you. That's, enough difference that there would be potentially a reason to include that. But I always encourage students to really be thinking strategically about, where do you want to describe an activity that's meaningful to you? This also means, though, again, that introspection, it's the word of the day, right? Thinking about how has that activity changed you in some way? What are the challenges that you've encountered through that activity, and what have you learned about yourself? Thinking really about why have you continued doing this? If this is something that a student has done over a longer period of time, why is this something that you chose to do? Did you decide that you want to try something new? It's not uncommon for colleges to see that students may have started high school doing something and then said, you know what, I really want to do something different. And that's totally okay. Colleges know, as you do too, parents, teenagers change their mind. So I think when you're choosing the activities that you want to describe, make sure that you have a good reason behind it and some stories to back up that rationale. Next slide, please. All right. Now, we wanted to give you all just like one slide. These are what we kind of call the out of the box or the grab bag. And I personally love these questions beyond just kind of some of the general archetypes that we've talked about, because they truly allow a student to see the personality of a school. And if a school is asking these kind of more unique, interesting questions, that will, typically give them insight into what their thinking process is and who they may be and whether or not they fit really who that school is. Barnard, for example, it is the, one of the women's colleges that is women's colleges in New York State that's affiliated with Columbia. So they literally ask about a woman in history or fiction that the student would want to converse with for an hour and to explain their decision. Occidental is a pretty quirky, cool college in Eagle Rock, California, right outside Pasadena, where Christopher is, that asks about students' quirks and idiosyncrasies because it's a liberal arts college. They really want to have that community of different types of students on campus. And then I'll be honest, UChicago is famous for their essay question. Literally, their first question is kind of about how UChicago fits in with the students' goals, but then they have a list of just supplemental questions that students can pick from that are actually solicited from the student body. Students can actually submit questions, and UChicago will put them forth. And they're pretty interesting. That's because UChicago is a pretty intellectual place. Students at UChicago will argue about philosophers at 2 a.m. on a Sunday while drinking milkshakes at Navy Pier. That is the type of place that a UChicago student is attracting, and where they're really trying to see who would fit into that kind of environment. So I think students, when you see some of these out of the box questions, don't necessarily be afraid of them. Again, all of Kevin's rules apply that he talked about. Really be yourself. They're not looking for you to impress them or, pick, I would want to, talk to Elizabeth I. I personally would, not going to lie, but you may really want to talk to Beyonce, and that's just as valid as long as you have a reason for it. So with the out of the box questions, be yourself. Different schools are going to want different things. And honestly, I think they're kind of exciting. So something to look forward to, I would say. There's no right or wrong answers.
And I do want to briefly touch on the additional info sections, and I'll actually be touching on two of them today, the general additional info and this year's special COVID additional info section. Keep in mind, these additional sections are optional, they are not mandatory, and they should be used if and only if you truly do have additional information that you need to put on the application and don't have any other room to provide. For the general additional information section, you should just be, again, don't try and impress them. You don't need to try and go on and on about the activities that you didn't have more space to talk about because they only limited you to 150 characters. They know that, they did that on purpose. You should, in those 150 characters, put the most important information, and additional info should only be something that you really have to say. Or maybe you need to explain why you had to withdraw from a course your junior year because you weren't able to fit it in, or there was some scheduling difficulty, or something happened at home. And you need to put that in the additional information section because there isn't somewhere else on your application that gives you room for that. That's perfect. Maybe you need to explain that you were taking additional courses outside of school and you're not able to put your transcripts on the Common App because they will call it transcripts, and so you need to explain why certain courses aren't showing up on your Common App even though they would be expected for you. Great. Those are all additional pieces of information you should put on there. You should only put this additional information if it's factual, if it's brief, If it's not going to be provided by anyone else, so if it's not going to be in any of your counselor or teacher recommendations, and if it isn't showing up elsewhere on the application already, again, don't repeat. And to number two, only put information in the additional information section if you can make it brief. It's not meant to be another essay. It's meant to be a quick bit of information. And the same applies for the COVID additional information section. Emphasis on additional here. If your information is, I survived COVID, I lived through 2020, then you don't need to put it there. If you're just going to talk about your activities being canceled or your sports season being pushed back, your reader will know that. Your reader also lived through 2020. That happened to everyone in the country. You don't need to explain that your school went online or that your courses switched to pass-fail. They will know that. That happened to almost everyone in the country. And your high school counselor will be putting that in the school report that they provide to your readers. You don't need to put that there. The additional information here is truly for things that were above and beyond the normal. If when school went online, you faced additional difficulty because you didn't have reliable access to the internet, that's something you should put in here. If maybe your grades dropped a little bit because you were sick because of COVID, that's something you should put in here. Don't put the general COVID information there. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Russ.
Thank you very much. I'm going to leave that screen up so people can see what you have there for the We'd Love to Help. And I will remind everyone that all of the sessions of this event are being recorded, and they will be made available also at the website strivescan.com/collegewise. Those will be available, the StriveScan versions of them will be available within a week, probably less time, but certainly will be available in that within that time. I want to thank Nicole and Christopher for presenting today, and want to thank you all for joining us. When you close this window, you will get a link to a very quick 4-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback you can provide. Also, as I mentioned, this is just one of many sessions being hosted as part of the Collegewise virtual fair. So be sure to sign up for additional sessions where you signed up for this one. And again, in about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording as well as all of the other session recordings at the same website, strivescan.com/collegewise. Once again, thank you to our presenters and thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening.